Thanks very much for joining us for the Intermodal Logistics Podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, joined by my co-host for this edition, Intech Logistics CEO, Rick Lagore. Hey, Rick.
Hey there.
And, intermodal is in the name of the podcast, and one of the key components of intermodal is a rail. So on this edition, we are focusing on rail and an organization that focuses on it as well, which just last year celebrated its 20-year anniversary. And that organization is GoRail. So to help us talk GoRail and railroading in general, we welcome Betsy Cantwell, AVP of Communications, and Brett Sebastian, State Director for the South Central U.S. plus Arizona. So Brett and Betsy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So to get started, we usually like to get a little bit of biographical information about our guests. So Betsy, you first. Tell us about yourself and your background in the industry, and then we'll jump over to Brett too.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. So I just celebrated my 10th year at GoRail last month, I guess. So it seems like a long time, but I know compared to lots of people who've been, in the industry for decades, not much. But and I've spent my whole time in rail at GoRail. Previously, I was in public affairs and communications work, and that's sort of what led me to GoRail to continue on doing public affairs work. I've just been here, started in focusing on digital and our increasing our digital advocacy efforts, and then have moved on to, supporting our field efforts and everything at GoRail.
And Brett, how about you?
Well, I've been with our organization since 2019, so I got about 4 normal months until COVID shut everything down. So that was a little bit of a learning on the fly, but it's been coming up on 6 years in the rail industry at this point. Been a very good run. Have gotten to meet a lot of great people amongst all of the different class ones, short line railroads, rail supply industry, as well as just the folks that we work with out in the field. So, I said earlier that my territory kind of encompasses the central region. Well, that's actually kind of expanded a little bit since that bio was written. So I cover much of the central United States at this point, as well as the very centrally located great state of Pennsylvania, which is where I'm at.
So tell us a little bit more about GoRail, what it does for railroading, and what its mission really is.
Sure. So, we're a national nonprofit advocacy organization focused on educating community leaders about the public benefits of freight rail, and building support for robust railroads across the U.S. We're a very small team. There's just 10 of us, 5 field organizers that have different territories that Brett just mentioned. They go in and meet face-to-face with folks to talk about rail at a very, Rail 101 level, highlight the public benefits, that we talk about, and then educate them about policies that might impact the railroads in their communities and how that impacts their daily lives.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, kind of who I'll work with, because I'm one of the field directors that we have. Betsy is located on the East Coast near DC with our national office team. And when we're out in the field, like I am this week, we're going to meet with a wide range of stakeholders that are in rail-served communities. So that's going to be folks like state legislators, county commissioners, chambers of commerce, economic developers, mayors, even just, small community organizations like JCs or clean air organizations. Anyone that may have some skin in the game when it comes to rail as part of their transportation network, then we want to be able to have those conversations with them to let them know, hey, here's what's going on with the rail industry. Because when you think about it, it's an industry that largely operates on kind of the side. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Most people's interaction with the railroad is they're driving down the highway and they see it off to the side of the highway. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But people aren't necessarily thinking of, well, what actually is that train carrying? What's in those intermodal containers? How does this actually impact our jobs downstream? How is it supporting the economy as a whole? What are the policies we're dealing with? And it's a very active industry in a way that I think most people wouldn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, I've been here for a few years now, but my perspective has changed on the driving by, the railroad crossings. You didn't really think about that before, but I think that's something that's valuable for everybody to really recognize what's going on there and the benefits that railroad carrying a lot of the freight has versus seeing more trucks on the road carrying that freight as well.
We've converted him. So back in 2007, we made a strategic move to go towards domestic intermodal. So we moved freight all over North America. And primarily it is intermodal. So 95% of why our doors are open every day is because the rails are operating efficiently and providing great service for ourselves and the shippers that we support. So, yeah, we understand that typically people don't think about the railroad. They think about the trucks on the road, and that's how things get from point A to point B. And yes, we use trucks on the front end and the back end, but rail is the primary focus as to how our freight moves for our customers.
So this is a good segue into the rail champion. So you mentioned that you have just 10 folks on the staff, but you're trying to sort of spread the word out at the state, local level. So how do you get people to become, quote, rail champions?
Sure. So there's sort of two tracks for that. It's what Brett and the field team works on, meeting with local leaders. And then the Rail Champions program is actually sort of our grassroots arm that we have always worked on. But last year we launched this campaign, Rail Champions, to really drive home the effort and put a face and a brand around it and, engage with citizens at that level. And we have an action center where if there are policy issues that arise, we can put it out digitally and have, everyday citizens engage. I think even as politics have become messier and nationally oriented, the all politics is local ethos is still top of mind. And that's really what our team works on every day through, these face-to-face meetings or the Rail Champions program, online.
Yeah, and it's great just to kind of also get out into the community and see what's going on because it's such a large national network. But you have people like your state legislator, they're working on so many different policies of state sessions going on. They're focused in Austin for 6 months out of the year, Oklahoma City, Topeka, you name it. And there's just so much territory to be covered that they may not know that, hey, there actually is a new distribution center that's being built in your district, in the community, that's going to create 20 to 50 jobs. That's going to move XYZ cargo, take trucks off of roadways. And us being able to go out there and hear these stories from people that are maybe a little closer to the action than good old Houston, Texas. I'm not in Topeka every day, but you go out there and you see what's going on. We can relay that message and be able to show, hey, this is actually how rail is investing in the community. Here's the benefits it's bringing. And it's just fascinating to learn these stories because, like I said earlier, it's just a very active industry in a way that you just don't necessarily see kind of on the day-to-day, just, living life.
Well, and the rail advocates is sort of the other piece of the puzzle that you were just talking about, Betsy, where you have people, I know on your website, you have people at the local level, at these various levels that Brett, you meet with all the time. That is it sort of evangelizing for railroad in a way you're trying to convert them and and to have them spread the word more?
Convert's messy. We show them the way. It's more just being able to kind of convey here's the policies that are going on because rail is unique amongst a lot of different industries where in some cases the train will literally operate in people's backyards. Right. So it's very close to home for so many people across North America, but they don't understand the role that policy plays in the day-to-day operations for the rail system. So, we want to be able to go out there and talk with all these different folks, all these different stakeholders to let them know what's going on with the railroads so that they can make informed decisions on their own. If a county's interaction with a rail line, it may be something as simple as just, we need to fix up Main Street in the railroad, doing a grade crossing separation, or even just fixing up or putting the safety equipment. But a lot of these folks won't know that there's federal grant opportunities for that. There's state grant opportunities for that. Here's how to work with the railroad. Here's the delineated ways that the government, the railroad, and even the general public, all three have responsibilities at a rail crossing. People don't know that. So being able to convey, here's actually how this system works, and here's how we can interact with it to promote the role that it plays in the community, that really helps it helps move things along and keeps the industry moving.
So I mentioned at the outset, 20-year anniversary was last year. So Betsy, I know that you have a sort of commemorative report that came out. Yeah, it's on the website on GoRail.com, right? Is it .com? Yeah, okay. .org. I'm sorry. And we'll have the link in the description to that. But tell us about the report and what it has in it, and sort of how it shows GoRail and the industry evolving over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I like the way you framed that, because when we sat down to sort of think about what the report should have in it, we really wanted to not just show how GoRail has evolved, but how the industry has evolved. And so we developed stats that lead the report, showing some gains in the industry, from the compensation for employees going up to fuel efficiency going up and safety increasing over that 20-year period that GoRail has been operating. Because I really think that while we've evolved as an organization and the way we do our jobs, sort of the core of what we do has stayed the same. We've expanded digitally. As Brett said, we have expanded to give more value into telling communities about rail grants and all these different programs available to them. But yeah, the core of our model in constituent engagement is really the same. But the industry is not the same. It is, even more important to, logistics has only grown in importance for communities and jobs, and, with just-in-time delivery, and rail is more at the focal point than it ever has been before. So yeah, when we sat down to write that, it was really important to tell both those stories. And, a small way that GoRail has changed is when we were founded in 2004, we were Go 21. I think it was growth options for the 21st century. And it was sort of envisioned as maybe a not forever campaign, but it has been so effective that we've, we're still here. So.
Well, I'm sure our viewers will take a look at some of the stats, because some of those stats were pretty amazing in terms of, we always see the stats in terms of tons moved and all this other stuff, but in terms of jobs created, carbon footprint reductions, there's just a number of really cool stats that really help push forward why rail is so important to not only the economy, but also to the environment itself.
When you're going through 20 years, Betsy, you're talking about logistics being a bit more high profile now. I think, Brett, the activity in rail is certainly always been there, but you mentioned starting just before the pandemic. Has that changed even just over those last few years in terms of how much people are paying attention to every aspect of things?
Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of like pre 2020 and then post 2020 in terms of rail policy, and a lot of what we've done over the past 4 years or so since the pandemic, it's been a lot more supply chain oriented and macro level policy oriented than it seems like what the team was historically working on prior to 2020. So so we've done everything. Like one of the big issues we worked on last year was relating to the California in-use locomotive regulation through their Clean Air Resources Board. This is an example of kind of this macro level policy that actually impacts the totality of the supply chain, because it was a state level regulation, but California was effectively trying to say through their resources board that no locomotive entering that state in 2030 or beyond could enter unless it was in a net zero emissions configuration, which is technology that, number one, does not exist. And number two, if it was readily able to scale up, and I snapped my fingers and made it available today, I can't retrofit 16,000 locomotives over the course of 5 years.
Yeah.
So that became a macro level, real existential threat to how the supply chain for the entire nation works, because California encompasses a very significant part of the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just one of a multitude of policies that we've kind of seen over the last 4 or 5 years that I would say were very different to prior to my time with GoRail.
So I think we've already kind of touched on this, but why would you say that advocacy is so important? I mean, is it really just, raising the awareness is something that just goes right down the middle of everything that kind of needs to happen outside of it?
Brett, you take this one.
So for that, using that California rule as an example, no sane human being wakes up in the morning and says, I wonder what the California Air Resources Board's rail-related regulations are going to be today. So we are able to kind of see these issues as they're cropping up, and we can relay them down to the coalition of folks that we'll work with. Because yes, it's a California state regulation, and that's not going to necessarily matter, or someone in Missouri is not going to particularly care what's going on 5 states away. But from a rail standpoint, the way that rail connects the entirety of North America, and you'll have trains that'll move hundreds of miles just to get from A to B, that becomes a very significant concern for how logistics operate in the Kansas City area or the St. Louis area, which are historically within the top 3 behind Chicago in terms of rail tonnage as rail hubs. St. Louis being one of those nexus points between the Eastern network and the Western network. Right. So if California makes this decision, it's going to impact those transcontinental lines, and it's going to impact things going down the line as far as the East Coast. So we need to be, with the role that we can play is to let folks know, hey, this is something that's happening, and here's X, Y, and Z for how we can get in front to protect the interests of, the St. Louis area and the jobs that are created through there and the rail-served industries that are there. And we'll do the same thing federally. We'll do the same thing for international trade issues. We'll do the same things out of state levels. It's such an interconnected network that what's going on in one state can have these downstream impacts in a way that folks just don't necessarily understand. And that's a role where we can play as advocates, but also educators. Because it isn't just, hey, here's the public benefits of railroads. That's part of it, but it's also, here's what's going on now. And that's been a much more vocal issue since COVID over the past few years.
Yeah, and to take that a step further, I was listening to your show with Anne Ranke, and it was great. And she was talking about the importance of getting out there on the Hill for IIJA, and telling people who you are, right? So we are the experts in rail, and like Brett said, people don't wake up thinking about railroads, and so you need to go and be the experts and teach people and meet them where they are.
So at this point in time, what are the top three issues that you're working on for 2025?
So we're very focused on the 2026 surface transportation reauthorization. And so we have, a group letter that the field is working on. We also, similarly on the other track, on the Rail Champions track, we have a petition focused on reauthorization priorities for the railroads. So some of those priorities are just, prioritizing innovation in terms of safety, right side, or fixing the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund, right? Funding grant programs, critical grant programs like the Rail Crossing Elimination Program and CRISI, and other grant programs that are really crucial to rail safety. Sort of combating any economic re-regulation efforts. And, those are some of the big priorities for rail for a surface transportation reauthorization.
There's also a bit of the added wrinkle right now that when we're in the spring, there's a lot of state legislative sessions that are going on. So we'll occasionally also work on state-related issues, trying to support our rail partners as something crops up. A good example of this right now is we actually work very closely with the Texas Railroad Association on their state legislative issues, and we're in support of a bill that's in the baseline budget that would give TxDOT both $350 million, but also the authority to assist cities and counties with road rail separation projects. Because right now, TxDOT can do those projects they're called on-system projects. They can do them on state highways and state-owned roads. But when you start thinking about what it takes to do a bridge or an underpass at Main Street in the Union Pacific line, very often that is a project that is going to cost millions of dollars, if not tens of millions of dollars. Cities and counties, especially rural locations, they do not have the budget flexibility for those types of capital projects. Yeah. So giving TxDOT the ability to pursue those projects and help out those local partners, that's a way where we can improve public safety, but also demonstrate that that railroads and the industry as a whole are being proactive towards some of these transportation and network, or not network, but it's like highway congestion issues that come up at those road rail intersections.
How do you balance? I know you're responsible for several states, but how do you balance overall the state versus the federal in terms of time and the energy that goes to advocating on each level?
Carefully. It really depends on what's going on, because sometimes, especially right now, when you're getting into late February through April, when so many of these state sessions, they're very spring oriented, deadlines are coming up, bills need to be filed, you're going through committee hearings. Sometimes there's one day you're focused on Texas, and then there's another day where you're focused on the day-to-day work that we're doing on the federal side. Mm-hmm. Luckily, right now, it's kind of working out where a lot of the state legislative issues that we're monitoring or working on, they're more pressing. But the federal side of things, we're trying to get our ducks in a row in preparation for surface transportation as it goes into 2026.
Yeah.
So part of that is also that advocacy and education mission where we're letting folks know, hey, here's how the Highway Trust Fund operates. Here's its deficit. Here's the role that rail plays within the multimodal system and why rail would care about the Highway Trust Fund solvency. Here's actually what's going on with these different rail grants at the moment. Here's ones that your communities have relied upon. Here's ways that we can try to pursue these different types of grants. And here's ways that your community or your state or whomever can be vocal advocates at the federal level to make sure that popular grant programs like CRISI or the Rail Crossing Elimination Program, that those continue on past 2026.
So speaking of the federal level, I mean, it happens at both the state and federal level. Obviously, the elections have consequences. So you have maybe something that you were looking at going into 2025, 2026, depended on maybe who was in power. So I guess we'll start at the federal level. Have you seen any differences right away in terms of what you're looking for in these advocacy issues based on the new administration and the new Congress?
We've seen that the Policymakers Congress is getting to work pretty quickly. They held their first T&I rail subcommittee hearing in January with Rep. Webster as he's the chair of the rail subcommittee and the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He held it on just freight and rail, the system, and sort of looking forward to reauthorization. And then I think next week, the Rep. Rouser is holding a transit and highway subcommittee hearing on trucking. So yeah, they're eager, they're getting to work, they're doing the fact finding. And we know that there are lots of areas for collaboration, for example, permit reform. I know that is a priority of Chair Graves. And we're also hopeful that Secretary Duffy's DOT is open to innovation, like I mentioned, in terms of safety and progress, on emerging technologies and being able to implement those rather than being locked into some old, technologies or processes that sort of inhibit safety on the rail side. So we are hopeful that, the administration will work with us on a number of things.
Mm-hmm. As you mentioned DOT, obviously there are some questions in the federal government right now about employee cuts and things of that nature. Are there things that you're concerned about in terms of how it would affect rail?
Hey,
I
Brett,
wouldn't necessarily say like it's a concern, but we're monitoring what's going on with the federal review of all of the different funding that's out there. And that's not necessarily just, on our side, it's going to be Federal Rail Administration and those rail grants, but
Hmm.
we understand it's a widespread process. It's going to be a slow moving process, understand why it's occurring. We just want to make sure that any of those disbursements that were promised to communities that received grants maybe within the last few months or the last few years, what is the status of those? Is it going to be made on time? What is an application going to look like going forward? What are the cycles going to look like going forward? These are popular programs. Rail crossing elimination, the last round of it, there were about 125 different awardees out of about 150 different applicants. So that tells me that there's a very significant appetite for these types of programs just because they have high capital cost and there really does require to be a little bit of some kind of federal support there if a project's going to occur. So making sure that those types of grants, what's the future of them? Is this something that we can continue and advocate for its continuity into next surface transportation reauthorization rounds? That's something that we're keeping a close eye on as well.
So rail crossing elimination, we've talked about it a few times here, but explain for those who are maybe unfamiliar with it why it's a priority, what it is, and why it's a priority.
Sure. So it's a new grant, new under the bipartisan infrastructure law, new grant program that funds not just, contrary to its name, not just crossing eliminations, but just safety enhancements at crossings. Could be eliminating it, could just be installing a gate, any type of improvement to a crossing to make it safer and to improve mobility and efficiency through crossings. There's a number of directives, and this is a good chance to plug GoRail's Rail Grant Hub. This is where we have information and resources on this grant program and plus a whole other host of federal rail grant programs. The RCE, the Rail Crossing Elimination Program, is really important because 95% of all rail-related fatalities occur at crossings or when people are on tracks. I think this grant program gets to the heart of the rail safety, issue in the country, and I think can have life-saving impact for communities across the country.
In addition to that, so moving through a couple of the other things we sort of touched on here, the Highway Trust Fund. The one of the pieces that you highlight on the website is the user pays system, and so as you're looking at that, so what is the idea behind it, and where does that stand as you're looking to the 2026 there?
Sure. So the Highway Trust Fund historically paid through fuel taxes, right? So that's the user pay system. But today, with vehicles being more efficient and the funding mechanism that was last raised in 93, it's not a sustainable funding mechanism anymore. So shortfalls have led to general funds being transferred to make the Highway Trust Fund solvent. And so, we're seeing that there needs to be a permanent fix. And what we advocate for is some sort of mileage-based fee, sometimes called a VMT. And this would be based on, mileage and distance and perhaps by axle. And, we talk about maybe moving to commercial vehicles first rather than generally, because I think some people are wary of the mileage-based fee and how you would implement that, basically. But, one of the issues is that trucks at their current 80,000 pound weight limit only cover about 80% of the damage that they cause to roads and bridges. And, but we still see people or, groups that want to increase the weight limit to, 91,000 pounds or larger. And this would only exacerbate sort of the, the distortion, the underpayment from trucks, which distorts the marketplace. And railroads, I guess we haven't mentioned it yet, are self-funded largely, right? That's just a thing that people commonly sort of don't know about railroads. And so yeah, we would like to sort of right this distortion.
It causes a little bit of a subsidization of one model versus the other. So what we're kind of looking at, from what I understand from the Congressional Budget Office, the current rate of funding for the trust fund, it'll become insolvent or somewhere around 2028 and require an additional influx from general revenue through the surface transportation reauthorization round, unless it's brought back to what it initially was created to do, which was be funded by those diesel, gas taxes, other different types of methods, which is one of the reasons that we're very vocal in trying to find what is a new model that we can move to, so that the fund doesn't require general revenue influxes, which is basically just deficit spending about every decade to 20 years or so. The last round I want to say was in 2008. So every time you have that deficit spending go in to restore the highway trust fund, well, then that is effectively the government subsidizing the integrity of roads, despite the fact that they're being chewed up, versus the private industry, which supports its own infrastructure. About one of the only things that we'll really be vocal for in terms of that discretionary public grant side of things are going to be those road rail intersections and those kind of the nexus points in the system where there's that public and private intersection. Because something that most people don't understand, when it comes to a railroad crossing, the railroad maintains the crossing, but the design of the crossing, that's on the city, the state, the county, whoever was the initial constructor of that crossing. And as a lot of our states and cities have grown, crossings that used to be the arms are fine, things are safe, now they're located in residential areas, now they're located in industrial areas. There's a lot more traffic that's grown up over the last 10, 20, 30 years. Now all of a sudden, maybe those crossings, they need to be separated to some degree. Should that be entirely within the railroad's purview? When you have thousands upon thousands of crossings nationwide, that becomes an unfunded mandate very quickly on a way that the system has grown when the railroads played no role. So trying to find that balance between public and private and having that level of funding, as a discretionary grant program, significantly different than a full-scale subsidization and deficit spending for the highway system.
Yeah, the crossing issue, it goes a few different directions, really, right? So you're dealing with maybe more certainty of schedule if you can have fewer actual situations where the railroads have to slow down, and then certainly traffic safety is a big thing. If a crossing has just a stop sign or something like that, then that could be a problem, especially if it's a heavily trafficked area. And then also, if you can kind of balance everything, it certainly seems like a big issue out there that, that's one of the areas that people see the railroad the most.
Right.
So moving along, you mentioned Anne Renke, Betsy, for instance. She's with IIJA now. We have IIJA, we have AAR. I know they're both mentioned on the GoRail site a couple of different places. So explain the relationship between GoRail and those other kind of big rail organizations.
Sure. I'll start with AAR. So GoRail, we're primarily funded by rail suppliers, actually. That makes up the largest portion of our budget. Different, the folks who make all the components for everything that goes into railroading. But then AAR is also, active on our board. And so we work with them on policy advocacy and legislative engagement. And AAR is just a great resource in general. In addition to all of its policy work, it's the leading research standard setter and technical standard setting. rail organization. So we looked to them for substance and educational materials. Something I wanted to mention, because I was listening to Rick, your recent episode on trends in the industry, is that last year AAR launched its rail industry overview, new RIO. It's a monthly publication they do from their economists, talking about how rail traffic kind of is, a bellwether for the economy, or, so, and I think that that's, really interesting. They just had their most recent one come out, I believe, a few days ago. So, AAR has great substance. And, we really look to them for a lot of our policy priorities. And then on the other hand, not on the other hand, but IIJA, we work less closely with, but, I think Brett in the field, we certainly work with their members, like ports. And, and then I think on issues like force switching, going back a couple of years, we definitely were aligned there, and some of the economic regulatory pieces, I think we're aligned on. So there's, always room for collaboration.
And Brett, one thing I wanted to hit on, because Texas and Arizona and you mentioned Texas already, Arizona is another one of the states that you cover. We're in this cross-border kind of discussion a lot now with growing volume expected and potential complications mixed in there. What are you seeing on the ground in those states in particular about that conversation about cross-border rail and making that a priority?
I would say it's a very significant priority to a lot of the economic developers and transportation folks down here. It's also very active. So, for example, one of the issues that IIJA supported us on about 2 years ago was the week before Christmas 2023. We had an abrupt shutdown of the rail portals into Mexico in El Paso and Del Rio, which represented a very significant portion of rail traffic between those two countries. This was done to transfer, I think the final total was about 8 different border security guards from the rail portals to another part of the Texas border when the migrant surge was happening there. And we were very active on this because is eight border security guards going to make a difference in another part of the border versus a very significant portion of U.S.-Mexico rail-based trade? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, that issue lasted, I think, all of about 4 or 5 days. But we mobilized stakeholders across Arizona, stakeholders across Texas, national level. IIJA was one of those folks. But we also had folks pretty deep inland in the United States that aren't border states. They understand that stuff that's going to move across the bridge in Del Rio, it's going to make its way up to Kansas City, Chicago, so on and so forth, into the rest of the country and have those downstream supply impacts. And issues like that have tended to crop up. I wouldn't say randomly, but they're fairly consistent since I started with GoRail. So like in the last round of surface transportation reauthorization, which ended up becoming the IIJA back in 2021, that's the infrastructure legislation from that year. One of the policies that was discussed in the House version of the bill was stopping trains right on the border so that they could switch out the crews from Mexican crews to American crews. But that created public safety concerns because if you stop the train on the border in Nogales, Arizona, while you conduct that crew switch, that's a stopped train backed up into Nogales, Mexico, where folks can climb on, contraband can be taped under the bottom of trains. Or in Texas, you have trains actually stopped on the bridges over the Rio Grande. So we were working with AAR, stakeholders, CBP, all these different folks to have an exception in that rule saying you can allow Mexican crews to go, I think, up to 15 miles inland, stop at a proper rail yard. That way the train is in a controlled environment. It moves, at least it doesn't come to like a complete stop on the Mexican side of the border, allowing for folks to climb onto the train. And we can kind of have a little bit of a hand on the wheel when it comes to the safety element there, as well as not having crews swap out in the middle of a bridge. So you get into these kind of niche in the weeds policies that happen at the border. but they're fairly consistent. And when you have one train that just stops in Laredo, Texas, or like Nuevo Laredo or Laredo, Texas, anytime that thing stops for about 5 hours, that represents probably about 10 or so trains that day that have to wait. So there's a lot of transborder trade that occurs. It's something that there's a lot of development that's happening. We want to make sure that we're able to keep trains moving in both directions, but we're also doing so safely.
Sounds like a textbook case of unintended consequences there that somebody might not have been thinking about with that policy. Well, before we let you go, and we've talked about the website a little bit, but again, Betsy, tell people where they can find more about GoRail and get involved.
Thanks, Kevin. GoRail.org is the place to go. And you can sign up as a rail champion. You could also go to railchampions.org and sign up there. We have lots of resources for local leaders. Like I mentioned, the Rail Grant Hub, and our blog has Rail 101 information, all sorts of resources, state specific stats in case you're curious. And you can also you can find the contact information for our field directors like Brett there if you want to reach out about an issue or set up a meeting. All sorts of good info. I would go to gorail.org.
It's an easy one to remember. And Betsy, Brett, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys.
So we've talked with IIJA. We've had some AAR folks on a while back too, but this is another angle of the rail industry that we hadn't touched on here before, and I think very interesting to hear their perspective on freight rail and the need to spread the word.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I would go back to their website. Their website has a ton of information on the value of railroads, and they did mention the state by state. You just click on each one of the states and you find out a ton of information as to what's going on. In addition, they've brought forward all the different things that occur just like we were talking the cross-border stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the cross-border, you think about Texas and Arizona, you're not really thinking all the ramification it has within the United States itself.
Yeah.
It's just, we're just such a connected society, and railroads are the linchpin to a lot of that.
Yeah, the California piece that he was talking about as well, how California connects to Missouri and Missouri connects to the East Coast. If something happens there, it's not like, if there's a rule that says this kind of locomotive can't cross into California, then even if it's originating in Missouri, then there's going to be an issue there somewhere.
Basically, it was saying that all locomotives had to be under California standards. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Otherwise, you lose complete flexibility in your operations, and cost just goes to the roof at that point.
Yeah, and I said it right towards the end. The unintended consequences. I think there are a lot of policies that maybe have good intentions or pure intentions at least, and don't think about all the other steps that have to go into making those things happen. And I think that's one thing on the rail side that GoRail is really focusing on here. So again, gorail.org. Thanks to Betsy and Brett for taking the time to speak with us. And thank you for taking the time to watch or listen. And we are available on all major podcast platforms. We appreciate anyone who likes, subscribes, drops us a comment or a question. You can also email us at podcast@intechlogistics.com if you have something a little bit lengthier that you'd like to discuss with us. We'd be happy to get back to you there. And we will be back soon with another episode. Also, you can visit www.intechlogistics.com to learn more about what we do. And again, we'll be back with another episode soon. Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.